Hi, and welcome to our panel discussion on the understanding and use of ethical data attitudes for the improvement of consumer relationships. My name is Tom Corey, and I'm the Vice President of Consulting Services at Wunderman Thompson North America. I'm joined here today by Mark Truss, Chief Research Officer at Wunderman Thompson North America, and we also have the great fortune of being joined by Brad Audette, Chief Marketing Officer of Mazda North American Operations as well. Our foray into this topic today is based on some research that was recently conducted by Wunderman Thompson, unpacking consumer perceptions of data ethics and privacy as part of our new Entrust Data Ethics Consulting offering. I'm going to hand it over to Mark to review some of our initial findings.
Hey, thanks, Tom. So this was a pretty big study, 1,000 folks in the US, 1,000 folks in the UK, and just a couple of really top-line findings that we thought were important is that when we asked people in the pantheon of everything going on in the world, where does data privacy and security sit? We were kind of shocked at how high it ranked on things people are concerned about. It was actually fourth on the list. This was end of 2020, right? So what was more concerning to people? The economy, the pandemic, and healthcare, right? Not surprisingly. But when you think about data privacy and security, it ranked higher on people's list of concerns than gun violence, sexual abuse of women, natural disasters, immigration, drug abuse. I mean, it's top of mind for people, which we thought it would be. I didn't think it would be quite that high. And our findings also showed that when, a company uses data in a way that consumers see as less than ethical, it has a negative halo effect on the brand, on the business itself, right? Those two are related in people's minds. So it really creates the need for a conversation around ethics, Another thing we found is that when consumers look at how companies use their data, they really have a sense that it's an opaque process. They don't understand what's really happening. They feel like it's happening outside of the range of their awareness. They're not really sure what's going on, but they have this latent sense that something's going on. And they have a strong desire to have more control over that. So Brad, the question for you is, from your position as a CMO, what best practices have you seen in the industry or across industries related to communication of data use in providing consumers control over that data?
Well, I think all of the legislation has caused a number of different marketers to be more serious in the way that they manage their data privacy. I think the challenge overall as marketers is weighing the consumer's need or desire for data privacy, yet at the same time their expectation for personalization, and how those two things merge together and converge is very difficult from a marketer standpoint, because you're walking a tightrope. So, you don't want to go too far one way or too far the other way. And I think the issue is to eliminate or to create that transparency. You talked about, customers being afraid of, kind of the opaqueness, if you will, of the data situation. But I think you've got to, as long as you're providing value for the customer in a very meaningful way, then I think that there's the ability to effectively navigate that. But it's a challenging situation, no doubt.
And we've looked at the value exchange, and even that's a little opaque to people, right? They don't necessarily completely understand that. So I guess that becomes the issue. I think you're exactly right. They're getting something for that data use, but how do we communicate to them in a way that they can understand that and feel comfortable with that?
Well, I think, look at the thing that, if you look at Amazon and all of the different buying behavior, geographic information that Amazon has, right? All of the various shipping addresses and everything. People have become very accustomed to curated shopping experience, right? I think the issue, though, becomes is how does Amazon use that? It adds value to the customers, eliminating friction. However, if Amazon was to sell that data to, let's say, an automotive insurance company for marketing purposes, then the customer would feel that their data had been violated. So I think, the challenge of being able to effectively communicate to customers on their data privacy is very difficult. Part of the opportunity, I believe, is to almost co-create the opportunity with the customer.
That's interesting.
Part of the dialogue process. Let them, let them tell us as marketers what degree they are satisfied. In Mazda's situation, I mean, we're a very human-centric brand. So we put, the value of humans, humanity, very at the forefront of everything we do. So when we think about how we use data in an ethical way, it's very much through the lens of how the customer wants us to use data for their behalf.
That's interesting. Tom, I know you had a follow-up on that.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you say that because while privacy dictates, the kind of the threshold of what everybody has to do, everybody's tolerance is very different, right? So you've got to have the option of choice in there for the different consumers because, what might be the right amount of data to be shared for me might not be the exact same for you. And so creating that opportunity for consumers to share that so you don't, so you can collect, the greatest amount to create that value exchange without, while creating that environment for consumers to have that differentiation that they're always going to have is really, really important.
Well, I think another big challenge from a customer standpoint is just the definition around what is data and what data are people actually collecting about me or about my behavior. And I don't think that, if you look at it from a societal standpoint, we really haven't done a great job at educating consumers of all of the various data touch points that exist. So there's a fear in the marketplace around data, but most customers can't tell you specifically what they're afraid of.
Yeah, we saw that in the data very clearly.
Yeah. Well, to build on that, another set of findings that we took away from our research was this idea that consumers only have a rudimentary understanding about the data being collected, to that point exactly, right? Around the data being collected, bought, sold, and shared about them. Most consumers feel there is a lack of transparency, and that transparency is really critical in establishing that trust, as well as a bit of sneakiness, which is kind of one of the words we use in the research from companies in terms of collecting and using personal data as part of the value exchange. Also, one of the really interesting findings that we took away was that consumers make a really thin distinction between unexpected data uses and unethical data uses. So there was a very kind of strong correlation between those two. And in many respects, consumers are seeing these as somewhat synonymous, suggesting extreme caution for companies as they deploy new data technologies, new marketing activations, new ways of working, integrations with products and services, and so on and so forth. So Brad, kind of building on that and building on that last discussion point around the awareness of the mechanics of the data usage and sharing, there's this other topic around the value exchange and the management of consumer expectations to mitigate being viewed as sneaky in the eyes of the consumers. So while we're trying to mitigate that perceived sneakiness, at the same time, consumers also have busy lives and they're managing their relationships and managing the relationships with companies that they engage with isn't something they're going to dedicate, a significant amount of time to, right? So we have to be kind of pragmatic about this. Have you seen examples of how to effectively keep consumers informed and managing their expectations without being overly burdensome and also acknowledging that there is a value exchange to be maintained overall?
Well, I think, this gets to the importance of just brand integrity and brand reputation, because the data doesn't exist independent of the brand, and how the brand behaves is kind of the entree to the trust around the data. Okay. And so I think those two things have to go together. And oftentimes when we talk about data privacy, data ethics, we're always talking about it independent or in a vacuum. And the reality is that there's a whole ecosystem of customer perceptions that need to be managed, of which the data component is just a part of it. So I think first and foremost is, behaving with a lot of integrity as a brand overall in the way that you manage your customer relationships. And I think, the data concerns that customers have right now around privacy and that lack of trust, is largely being driven by just a lack of trust in large institutions in general, right? Customer trust of government right now is a very big problem. So that cascades into other areas of their lives. And at the same time, there's this conflict because they're also looking for companies and brands to have greater societal impact than governments, right? So it is a very complex, kind of intellectual and emotional challenge with customers when you think about all of the different dimensions that need to be managed in this situation.
It really is interesting when you talk about that, the importance of adding, what we call the use case, but really the value exchange, right? Because the discussion around data being collected, devoid of that second piece of it, like who wants their data collected, right? As kind of in a vacuum, the topic of would you want your data collected? The answer from most people would probably be no. But when you start to also weigh that against the value exchange and the benefit to the consumer, that almost feels like the starting point of the discussion, not the follow-up, right? Like, this is the benefit you're getting. Also, this is the data that we're collecting, not this is the data we're collecting. All of a sudden, people are on the heels.
Well, it's all about, I think, intention, right? So
exactly,
the challenge becomes is when you do something with the data that the customer didn't intend for you to do.
Right.
An example, they're curating shopping lists and they're actually managing your psychology and getting you to buy more products and services from them through the way that they curate the shopping process through the use of data. In those situations, customers are very amenable to that. They enjoy it, right? But in other situations, if you were providing information to like Google and you're being targeted or you're being retargeted, different website platforms or whatever, then sometimes customers would say, well, why are you following me around? And the situations are very kind of similar in some ways, but it's the way that the customer went into the engagement or into that experience. And so, you have to listen regularly and find those clues based on the customer behavior and engagement so that each one of the use cases, each one of the personalized experiences can be bespoke to that customer's preferences.
I wish we had another hour because this is such a great conversation to go into, but I think we're out of time.
Well, actually, on that note, I think we do need to wrap up here. So I really like to thank Mark and Brad for joining this conversation. I find this topic to be wildly interesting and a really kind of critical discussion that we all need to be having moving forward as ecosystems and environments constantly change and shift. It's something that needs to be constantly revisited and assessed, and companies and organizations need to make sure that this is on the forefront of kind of their agendas, right? It needs to be something that they're thinking about constantly and reacting to. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining the conversation today. We are going to be doing a live conversation on this a little later in the afternoon, so please come back and join that open dialogue. And yeah, we wish you both the best and look forward to talking about this again soon.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.